there's a couple of things that really resonate for me. First of all, my forever notion of what art is was formed when I was a little kid, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and the painting Prometheus Bound had been recently rediscovered. I don't know if you know the history of that painting, but Rubens painted it and traded it with a Dutch merchant. And it was with two other paintings. They were crated and shipped to New York, and they remained in the crates until the 20th century. No one ever opened the crate. The guy who ordered them died, and they were in this house that was built in the 1600s. And I guess they were re urban renewal or something, and they discovered this crate. So that magnificent painting was put on the display at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And I can still remember being 4 or 5 years old, looking up at that thing, and it formed in my mind as this is what art should be. It had figures, they were naked, there was animals, there was blood, there was passion, there was all of this stuff. It was, the figures upside down. It didn't make any sense, but it made an impression on me. So that's my first visual memory of what art is, and it's still pretty steady. When went to school, I can remember being in kindergarten and making paintings, and I can still remember making a painting of a girl with a dress. And the canvas that they gave me, the paper wasn't big enough. So the head, I had to add another piece of paper to get the head on, right? I was absolutely certain that I wanted to be an artist. And I really didn't compare myself to other people because it was like inside, I just knew that I was going to do this. And even if I wasn't good at it yet, I was going to get good at it because it was what I wanted to do. And I went looking, uh, you know, I, where I lived in this little town, there were two interesting houses in that town. One was the early 19th century Georgian style house that had been one of the original farmhouses, which had 2 acres of land when they divided up the property. So it had a carriage house and it had this beautiful kind of red brick Georgian style mansion. And next to it, there was another house was a mysterious house. It was another 2 acre lot that had a fence around it and it was covered with ivy and trees. And you couldn't really see the house very well from the street. And it had a driveway that went up a hill, and you had to go, and you couldn't see the yard until you went up that hill and went into the yard. I'm 5 years old, and I just ventured into this property. I wasn't invited. I just wandered in, and I encountered this old guy down on his knees working in the dirt. He was wearing wooden shoes and he had a World War II Army uniform on. And he looks at me and he talked to me, and I just was interested in what he was doing. And and then I followed him around like a little puppy, and he had this workshop and he made woodcuts. And I was fascinated with what he did. And he would, he talked to me like in a very nice way, and then he would say, "Okay, you got to go now." And I kept wandering back. Well, he taught me how to make woodcuts. So by the time I was 8 years old, I had made a woodcut that he's the guy he was responsible for creating products called speedball products that were
Mm,
used in schools across the United States. Well, he had gone to Penn State. He was a Pennsylvania Dutch farm boy who had gone to Penn State and got a master's degree in art education. And he was teaching in Philadelphia and he had a business sensibility and he got a job working for a company called the Hunt Pen Company, and their business was making crow quill pens and Boston pencil sharpeners. That was what they did. So he got in there and he came up with this idea of creating products that could be used in schools. And it was linoleum cutting, wood cutting, and printing, like learning how to do lettering and things like that. So he was doing these little books and creating these products and traveling around the country, but he was always testing products there. So he would make these woodcuts and then test the color on the paint, and he would hang these things in the woods and the trees in his property. The property had been laid out by European gardeners in 1929 when they bought the lot. and they had been descendants of what were called in Europe espaliers, which were royal gardeners. So they brought in like 2 feet of topsoil that they put over the whole ground, and they laid out the ground so you were in that property. You couldn't see the house from certain parts of the property. They had these little houses that were like little gingerbread houses where they kept tools and product. And they had this big garden. They had a fish pond with a Japanese footbridge over it. They had grapes in one area. They had all these different so it was a really interesting place. And he had this driveway with bronze statues that he had bought and put around the edge of the driveway. And so he was an artist, and he amused me, and he found what I was doing amusing. So I would bring all my paintings and he would give me these critiques. And then one day he says to me, he said, I think you're going to be a painter. And he said, so you come back on Sunday and I'm going to take you to an art show. Now, I had never been to an art show. And he said, dress a little differently, a little better. So I showed up and he took me to this little art show in an art center in Haddonfield, New Jersey. And there was two people having a show. One was a guy who during World War II had been a battlefield artist, decorated for making drawings under fire in Burma during World War II, right? And the other one was a woman who did all these portraits. And this guy, who I get introduced to him, his name was George Vale. He says to me, he says, you want to be an artist? He said, you got to learn to draw. The best thing to learn to draw is the figure. So we have a figure study group here on Saturday. You should come. I'm 12 years old. So I go home and I say to my mother, I met this guy and he tells me to be what I want to be. I have to come to this figure drawing class. And I said, it's really like, I think I have to pay like $20 or something, but I get to come and draw the figure. And she said, that's not a good idea. And I said, oh, no, there's no discussion. I'm going. The question is whether you're going to give me the money or I have to go find the money some other way. So, so she couldn't, I was not you couldn't talk me out of it. So I still remember I go there. She drops me off at the corner, and I can still see the pavement as I walk to this up the steps into this building. And as I come in, I'm a little late, and they're already drawing. There's this amazingly, wonderfully beautiful young woman, maybe 18 years old, who's sitting there completely naked. I've never seen a naked person in my life, let alone an 18-year-old woman. And there's two people there drawing, and I come in, I got my drawing stuff, and I just start drawing. It was a mess. The worst, I had no idea what to do, etc. But I'm sitting next to this woman, and she's drawing like a wizard. Well, that woman who learned to draw the figure sitting next to, her name was Frida Ryder. And several years later, she was a nationally known person because she was the courtroom artist for the Watergate hearings.
Wow.
So I'm sitting next to her, learning how to draw the figure sitting next to. And what I didn't know was she was an identical twin. And she had a sister who was also an artist. So she was the artist for ABC News, and her sister was the artist for CBS News. And they were both drawing the Watergate hearings, and they were rivals among themselves, right? So I was getting told about being an artist by these two people, the battlefield guy. He says, everybody in my art in my outfit got a carbine and I got a goddamn pencil, and so anyway, he could draw like the wind, they were powerful people who had a huge influence. And my mother used to say, they're just filling your head with wild dreams that are never going to come true. And I said, well, I don't care. I love listening to what they're telling me, and I'm learning from them. And that's how I got started. And I was certain I was destined for something, and that the forces of the world were helping me get there, if that makes any sense. I was going to find the resources I needed, and they would lead me to the other resources.